Hello, how's it going? This is going to be a little bit of a buffer. Meanwhile, while everybody tries to enter the chat room, while I discuss the Nintendo Philips, well, the Philips CDI rather. Have one image over there. I'm going to add some more to my notes. So this is another entry in my Truth About Nintendo series. The CDI is actually not a Nintendo console. It was owned by Philips, published by Philips, and there were also ties to other companies. I believe Sony was one of them, ironically, which I'll get into in a little bit. Among other companies. I think Magnavox was also involved or something. Let me go check. Yeah, I was right, Magnavox. Is a home video console and media player. Philips had rights to some Nintendo products, right? It's not the first time that would happen. Sega, a big console company, had the rights to Fantasy Zone and that Yu Suzuki game, and they put it on the TurboGrafx 16, possibly because, or actually it was the PC Engine, the Japanese version, because the Mega Drive wasn't doing well in Japan, so they tried and made some money off that way. I'm trying to figure out other examples. Sony actually was pretty big on Sega, which I'll get into a little bit. They made Sewer Shark actually for the Sega CD. Very ironic, which I'll get into in a little bit. Nintendo has been around for over a century. (1889), I believe, when they were doing the Hanafuda cards. (1889), that was close. Founded on September 23rd, 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi. I'm assuming he's related to the Yamauchi who was head of Nintendo in the 80s and 90s. The company had been known for cab services and even love hotels. La-di-da. But after the 80s, they became one of the biggest video game companies of all time. They actually, if you've been to Nintendo World, you know that they've done the Atari or Atari clone thing or something. They try to make a console in that generation as well, prior to the success of the Famicom and NES. There was success from the NES, there was success from the SNES. However, they were worried. The Mega Drive did well. I mean, the Genesis did well in America, eating up a pretty big share, and there was a lot of competition from other consoles. Although they did have a lot of brand recognition. There was some interesting stuff going on in the NES and SNES era. Nintendo had the quality control thing to counter the problem of the... I'm guessing because the games were offensive in the Atari era, like the Atari porn or the bad quality games like E.T. and stuff. But anyway, they had a 3 game per company rule, which did get broken by Dragon Warrior and Enix over the 4 Dragon Warrior games that came to America. This is an America only rule, by the way. I don't know what Japan did. Japan, they just did every game, I guess. Learned everything. I'll get into why that's important for a while. Well, furthermore, SNES still had Nintendo approval in the United States for such things such as essentially nude 16-bit female characters, which are blurry and not as done well as the mountains in the game of Final Fantasy III. These are the enemies who you fight to the death by slow sword death, where it's a game with black satanic mages. That for some odd reason, nude harpy woman was offensive. But let's skip back to that later. Philips' strategy was basically to combat the Amiga, the Spectrum, the PC Engine, the Atari ST basically. They had a predecessor called the Philips... Let me double check. I think it's called the Prevac or something. The Philips Video Pack Plus G7400, exclusive to Europe, and was supposed to be a sequel to like the Magnavox Odyssey or something. It was only manufactured by Philips. It was known to have high resolutions and stuff. There's emulation for this by O2EM. Specifications include an Intel 8048 CPU, 4.91 MHz, 6 KB RAM, 1 KB ROM, display of 320, had 1 channel audio, 8 sounds, RF, SCART, this is Europe, ROM cartridge port, had a voice expansion, chess module expansion, and Microsoft Basic module, good for programming. Their original intent with the Philips CDI was for media, for selling a cheaper computer than the PC-ROM. Prior to that, market getting wiped out. They were not meant to compete with Sega and Nintendo. They were trying to do a Neo Geo different kind of strategy, a 3DO like different kind of strategy. Sony and Philips came out with the CDI format and used it. Philips. It was developed by Philips and Sony, and for whatever reasons, Philips ended up owning it. I don't know if there's a court case or whatever. I haven't gotten into that. Maybe I'll get back to that in another video. It was a computer without a keyboard, floppy drive, monitor, mouse, less operating system software. You can plug it into a TV instead of a monitor, and that way you save a lot of money on the cost of a computer. This is on Wikipedia that retail for $150, but I hear other sources that said retail at $1,000. So I'm not sure what was true about it. Philips CDI sold 1 million. Was active in the years of 1991 to 1998, although by 1994, which I'll get into in a moment, Philips CDI was pretty much destroyed. He used a Philips CPU opposed to like a Motorola, which is common in the Genesis and the SNES. I'm not sure about the TurboGrafx and other console. Although the 3DO does use a Motorola upgraded one a little bit. It's 68020 instead of a 68000. Philips CDI is one of the first consoles to use internet capabilities, although it was weird because like it was 1996 when the console was already obsolete, although it didn't last that long in the first place. Philips CDI lost $1 billion for the company. Had an MPEG encoder, which was very good for videos. Very interestingly, you use karaoke CDs, video CDs, CDG, audio CD, and CDI for the game console or media console. Its online service was CD Online. The CPU was a SCC68070. I don't know how that compares to Motorola 68000 or 6820. Hopefully I could look it up right now. Look at it in a moment. The graphics was the SCC 66470. Oh, it's based on the Motorola 68000, interesting enough. 16 to 32 8-bit processor. So it's definitely in that generation. I don't know if they needed that to process compact disc, but maybe. I don't really know that much about it. I would assume that was the case, though. Oh, it says it's mainly a binary compatibility with the Motorola 68000. However, it doesn't have an equivalent chip in the Motorola series. It has a 24-bit address bus, giving it a theoretical 16 megabit maximum RAM. It's not at all possible, though, as all the onboard peripherals are mapped internally. Not sure what that means, but hopefully I'll figure it out later. It operates at 4 to 17.5 megahertz, has 16 megabytes of memory, a 16-bit counter timer unit. Collection here. I'm guessing that timer unit is possibly used for time functions when you do a clock, or use the time function when in a game where you need a timer or something. So there are some positives as a result of this. The CDI technology was impressive. The CDI format was impressive. Some of the visuals, when I watched it, after the second time watching the AVGN video, I noticed the graphics are really good. I'll show a clip right here, actually, of some of the graphics, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. As soon as I can, maybe I should download my app first. I updated my YouTube ad so I can figure out the live chat stuff, sorry. We'll save it here. I think I saved it already, actually. Let me just link it to the, what do you call it? The one is an off center. Probably gonna move it anyway. For the exploit. Oh, freaking A. You can see the graphics here, pretty crisp. They're not, I mean, the SNES can do digital graphics. It could do it can do. It probably doesn't do this, possibly. I think that was what they were aiming for with the Philips add-on for the SNES, actually, possibly with this. And then Nintendo would do the actual game creation, unlike what actually happened prior to the Fallout they had. Philips would have the ownership, have the rights to use the Mario license to create Nintendo games. And it's weird. I didn't really follow the CDI growing up. It didn't show up in the game magazines I read, and I didn't read that many. I didn't see it at Toys R Us. There wasn't a lot of exposure to it. They only sold 1 million in like 8 years, and for those 7 years, I didn't see one. I've never seen one in real life. I've seen them online. I've seen them in YouTube videos, but that was about it. Because again, they didn't sell that well. I never heard about these games though and how awful they were until the YouTube era, when AVGN reviewed it. Actually, they were pretty popular memes in college too. But anyway, look at these graphics. You can tell it's very good. I don't know how it looks like on a TV. Maybe it'll be more blocky. Maybe it'll be stretched out. But watching the CGI graphics on the HVGN video on like an iPhone and stuff, that was pretty good. The lighting is very good on this game. The color's very good. I don't know if it's better than SNES, but I think it was better than the N64. The N64 was very... The 3D in that was not very sophisticated. CGI might... I don't even know if the CGI was most sophisticated with the 3D or not. But it was pretty cool that... you can tell that the picture quality here is pretty cool. It looks like an indie game. A current day indie game. Just like with the graphics look. It was done by an independent studio, mind you. I don't know. Then again, I've probably seen too much CD4 on the upconverter. The font on the 25 is very good. Blue font. Some shadowing in that. I mean, it's not pixels, you know. It's like cell shading or something. I don't know what it is, but this is a better art technique, just in general, which I appreciate from what they did and what was driving them possibly to the CDI and Philips. I'll get to why it failed, and it wasn't because of this. Like, if I've heard from Wikipedia that their mentality behind making the Zelda CDI games was to upgrade the graphics. It's sort of a remake, essentially. Not what they said, but what I'm saying is that they want to remake the game like with these kind of graphics. In my opinion, in the year 2017, that would be comparable to like the Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI Android non-matching pixels in the game. In the remake. That's what was unfortunate. Wikipedia even mentions at the time it impressed, because the graphics were definitely different from the SNES graphics. Like, the technology was impressive at the time. Well, maybe the gameplay. I don't know. I haven't seen a clip of the actual CDI at CES thing, and probably because they didn't have an actual booth at the game conferences and stuff, from what I've heard, which is a problem. Maybe the critics enjoyed it. I don't know if they still own the CDI. I would even play devil's advocate. I would say some of these graphics impress better than the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask of N64. they're not better for other reasons. In fact, I would definitely say Majora's Mask is better, one of the best games of all time. Ocarina of Time, people consider one of the best games of all time. Even before with Legend of Zelda NES and only to the past SNES would be considered the best games of all time. Technology was impressive though, and if they had made a game that utilized these graphics and used it better with the gameplay, it would have been really good. Nintendo didn't want to supervise, which is unfortunate, and a lot of problems that resulted. The CDI, yeah, it could have been a competitor of the N64. I'd say that. The N64, the console itself, I don't have that many good positive things to say about, which I'll get into. Another truth about Nintendo, but I'll get into later. I was born in 1986 and never heard of the Philips CDI or any of his games till like college in like 2006, 2 years, like sophomore, junior year or something. AVGN was a major exposure. And frankly, who cares if a console out of production doesn't do well after laughing about the Zelda games? Hotel Mario, I think, was a little bit ruder. Well, it's a Stone Luigi thing. Well, I'll get into that a little bit later. The graphics are very impressive in my opinion. Zelda Adventure sure looks like a 3DO-ish console. 3D graphics, etc. It'd be interesting to think about if Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask were remade with CGI graphics. Or there's a character named Philip or something, I don't know. There'd be something interesting if there was some sort of meta involved and then they made up for it. And, not retcon, but sort of redid things and rewrote history in the future or something like ridiculous like that. Why isn't the Philips CDI, Zelda games, and possibly even Mario game considered the best games of all time? Quite honestly, they aren't. The gameplay and the really bad FMVs are really bad and haven't aged well. AVGN used a 3-button controller and only used 2 buttons. At a nonsensical, awkward, nonsensical way of sort of getting to the menu, and it wasn't always responsive, and it was impossible to fight enemies, and the game wasn't very smooth, and there's a whole list of complaints. But anyway, the main summary is the gameplay just wasn't there. It's not going to be considered one of the best Zelda games of all time. It's not even an official licensed Nintendo game. So if it was, it wasn't considered Zelda game of all time. Gameplay was important, and it's so interesting. I figure with some of the experience with the Magnavox, Philips would have had more experience. But apparently it wasn't so. The FMVs are pretty weird. It's a Stone Luigi, and the dialogue is very Time of So-ish, which just shows you another time about me being in college in 2006. Because like that was the time where Time of So was really rising along the side of the room, and it's all the CGI. Great company to be with, Nintendo. Nintendo, I don't know if it was because they were really expecting CDI to go strong or something. They were really expecting this add-on to really improve. But this was a really bad deal by Nintendo. And Nintendo had some really good years, but had really lost its way from N64 all the way till before the Wii started and the DS started. Maybe the GBA. I guess the GBA, a really good console. It was just very short-lived thanks to the DS. Which makes me think about another truth about Nintendo. How the move from GBA to the DS was actually a really good move. Even though I probably wouldn't have made that risk considering how well I thought the GBA was doing. But again, the DS numbers speak for themselves. There were a lot of mistakes made by Nintendo this time. Captain N, Mario was missing. There's... I want to see if my hands are in a certain way so I can position myself properly. Nintendo had made a series of mistakes. They originally made a deal with Sony, then Sony and Nintendo betrayed each other. And then they went with Philips CDI, and then they backed out of that deal. And then they still give the rights to Philips for the CDI games, and that's pretty much what led them there. And for the Philips CDI aftermath, they gave up on the CD format until they went to the GameCube, and then they went to the N64. Prior to that, they went to the N64, which was another... It wasn't a failure, but like... Not in America, at least, but it was a problem. Like, they weren't dominant anymore. They declined. They let Sony take over. And, again, it's going to be a really truth about Nintendo series thing, but it's an interesting thing about Sony. I did mention before about how Sony knew everything. It was Sony all the time, Austin. It was Sony all the time. Like, they worked on the Sega CD. They made a game for the Sega CD. They helped manufacture, or whatever, the Philips CDI. They knew everything pretty much. They just made better decisions than anyone else at the time. They have third-party support, which was lacking on the 3DO, although they did have it. It pretty much was what made the NES so strong, and it carried over from the NES, Super Nintendo, to the PlayStation. The CDI didn't have a lot of third-party support, obviously. No Capcom, no... I'd like to go back to the CDI at another point to figure out if there were deals for a Capcom game, a Konami game, a Sims game, a StarCraft game. Like, where was the potential for the Philips CDI? Like, did they just not care? I mean, they originally intended to just be a replacement cheap PC, well, by chopping away the parts and costs, so that people would buy them at cheaper costs. But they decided to transform it into a gaming console, which is a little bit too late. PlayStation got a lot of third-party support. Plus, you get away from this topic since I am mainly talking about the CDI. The CDI had a lot of capability. If they had gotten Final Fantasy VII on the CDI, I don't know how they would have done it, but if they had done it, it could have been really big. The graphics would have been really good. Maybe it would sell very well. Maybe it wouldn't because of the funky controller or whatever. I don't know. I haven't really played a Nintendo CDI game or a Philips CDI game, whatever. It's really hard to find a CDI, so it's hard to figure out this stuff by experience. And I mean, it wasn't as big of a deal of a laughing stock as it was 10 years ago, as it was 20 years ago. Because really, nobody knew what the CDI was. But the graphics were really bad. Brain Dead 13, there's a lot of grotesque Nickelodeon, Gremlins, PG-13 like rating stuff. That is sort of a comical version of the Thing graphics or something. But Zelda, I don't know about Mario, but some of the Zelda games, it was very weird. Like, it was sort of like Ark of the Covenant stuff, PG-13, Steven Spielberg melting faces off when Zelda or Link would defeat somebody in certain scenes. That was very disturbing. It was like bad version of Simpsons animation. Like, it was amazing what they did there. It was absolutely grotesque what they did with animation. It was outsourced to like a Russian studio, I believe, according to Wikipedia. I didn't actually look up the images of the instruction manual to figure out if they're true, but it wasn't done by Nintendo according to my sources. The whole game wasn't. They just proved what Link and Zelda were supposed to look like in Ganon. I mean, it's very embarrassing. However, it's also very hilarious. Shocking and hilarious. Like, go for the game, hearing the horrible dialogue. Like, some people complain about, like, Space Pirates, but at least it has good production values. Like, it's a very... I mean, Space Pirates is a very poorly made 3DO game, which is made, like, impossible to, like, beat the game unless you memorize the thing, which nobody wants to do. But Philips CDI, that was a different kind of unique bat, I guess. It has very the roomish, flower lady dialogue at times, where like the characters sort of look like they're not talking to each other. ADRing was not sophisticated in video games back then. It was probably like the first ADR studio was a problem. So Philips had to do not only create the game, also figure out how to ADR it. I mean, everyone's response to the FMV is like, oh, it's done in paint. And it looks like it was done in paint. Who knows, it was probably done in Amiga, possibly. But it's pretty grotesque. The frame rates, the loading. The gameplay is really bad, too, because, like, there's a lot of low enemies, a lot of quick enemies. Like, it didn't seem like it was tested, and it was done... It seemed like it was done on a budget, even though I don't know if the source is true about it. Also, I'm very flabbergasted that the first two Zelda games did so poorly, they made a third one. Like, you figure after failing in the first two games, you want to make a third game. But at least it was done by a different company, I guess. It's a very interesting predicament. I wonder what Nintendo execs thought about it at the time. Like, was it worth violating the contract so that these games wouldn't get released? Or maybe they could add another stipulation and then buy the rights, licensing rights back so they can prevent them from making the games. I mean, the CDI... It's sort of a domino effect. Now that I think about it today, well, the CDI you won't have the N64, pretty much everything prior to the Wii and the GBA. Because the N64 they lost, because the CDI they lost on CD games. Because the N64 they lost out on Final Fantasy 7, and then they were in first place in the console war for the third year in a row. And because nobody would remember the CDI and blame them for it, because they didn't make the games anyway. Even though I'm not sure if people then would have found out. N64 was also very poor RPG-wise. NES had like Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior. Super Nintendo, great JRPG console. And then CDI and N64, both foreign JRPG consoles. Probably why Sega beat them in Japan. I mean, I like the N64 JRPGs, but a lot of people didn't. Sega beat them in Japan as a result. PlayStation obviously beat them. Final Fantasy 7 ended up being the highest selling Square Enix JRPG of all time, at least. Like 10 million. Probably more with like Steam and PSN downloads and stuff. PS4 downloads. It was very worrisome what was going to happen to Nintendo in America after the lack of success in Japan from the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation. However, somehow, probably because of the success of the NES and the SNES, they survived. And Ocarina and Majora's are good games among other games in America. They didn't have the Evangelion game, unfortunately, but I don't know if anime was big at the time. I'm trying to figure out what else I can say about the gameplay. There's a lot. The graphics are good, but the gameplay isn't clear. Like where you're supposed to go through doors, or like there's a whole thing that you have to crouch, press a button to activate the menu because there's no start menu, and then as a result, it's just obvious what's going to be the problem with the game. We set up the controller like that. Like you can't crouch, you can't jump down, you can't. As I mentioned, if you're near a doorway, you have to activate the doorway with the same button, or you can do the menu. And you could just when AVGen did it, he had it on the 3-button controller. The third button was used, which is ridiculous. Like maybe they wanted more accessibility with the controllers, but doesn't seem to have a strategy on it. Like 3DO, there's the 5-button version of Street Fighter, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. There's the 6-button version of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. On the Genesis, the 3-button version of Championship Edition, Champion Edition. The 6-button version of the Champion Edition. The company that Flawless did to do the Zelda game didn't really figure out how they were gonna use the controllers. What happened is a really poor result. I mean, I'm pretty sure Flawless doesn't care. Like the CDI is way in the past. It was like perhaps 20 years ago when they discontinued the console. Even though it's definitely been 20 years since the console was remotely relevant. Oh, I should probably also look up the years that all the 32-bit consoles came out. It would be a lot easier if on the CDI Wikipedia they linked which generation console it was. No way, it's not here. So the 5th generation and 32-bit, 64-bit, and 3D era of video game consoles. Best-selling console was the PlayStation by a wide amount, followed by N64 and Sega Saturn. mean, it was a very interesting time at the time. The shift from 2D to 3D computer graphics. It seemed a little bit small on the Zelda console, but at least it was in the right mentality. They try to emulate the success of the NES and SNES Zeldas. We're about to laugh. Okay, so according to this on Wikipedia, 3DO Interactive Multiplayer was released October 4th, 1993. And it was first released in the United States. Atari Jaguar was first released November 23rd, 1993. Sega Saturn was first released November 22nd, 1994 in Japan. 1 month prior to, actually 1 week prior to even. That's not a big difference, which we'll get into later. Sony PlayStation was released in Japan December 3rd, 1994. And of course the Nintendo 64 was released on 23rd, 1996. It's a huge delay. I don't remember. That's weird. I don't know why I bought the N64 way later. I could swear the PlayStation was after the N64. And the release between Japan and North America was like a couple of months, June to September. Meanwhile, PlayStation's release in Japan versus America was like a whole year. And Sega Saturn was a lot less. But in any case, back to this Philips CDI. Well, that 64 actually had the highest selling game for that generation. Super Mario 64 at 1.62 million bundled in. The 32X was released November 19th, 1994. Atari's Jaguar CD, 1995. The N64 DD, 1999. That might as well be another generation. Here comes the other games. I'm probably doing this in the wrong order. Dolphin Towns Marty was released February 20, 1993. That was almost that was around like half a year to a year ahead of the 3DO. The Amiga CD32 was released September 17, 1993, prior to the Panasonic 3DO. CBS Changer was released in 1994. Which is like the Saturn and PlayStation time. It doesn't say which month on Wikipedia. The PCFX was released December 23rd, 1994. I don't know if that was able to compete with the Sega Saturn or the PlayStation, but I'll get into that later. Bandai Apple Pivot was released March 28th, 1985. That's way too late compared to the Saturn and the PlayStation. If they had released it earlier, maybe they would have had a jump start. The Playdia, sequel to the Pivot, was released September 23rd, oh, that was before actually. It was the predecessor to the Bandai Apple Pivot, and was released September 23rd, 1994. Castle Lupi was released 1995 in Japan. Everybody says it was like way after that. So back to the Philips CDI. Let me see if I can remember the dates properly. I mean, say this is the 4th generation, but I had like a 32-bit thing. Let me see what CD was. So the CDI was released December 3rd, 1991. Still around SNES Genesis time. EU 1992. So they had a head start. Although they didn't know what the heck they were doing, they had a head start. And that's some interesting ideas, which were copied by like, the Saturn with the different kind of CDs you can use, and the 3DO and how many CDs you can use. Actually, I don't know how much other than the audio CD. I guess the sprites for the Philips CDI were smaller. That's probably why the conservative fourth generation console, although I would still disagree with that. So they both have multi-button game controllers, parallax scrolling. The colors are pretty elaborate, I guess. But I felt it was still more of an equivalent of a PlayStation kind of 2D rather than. Yeah, what basically was that? Because it was supposed to be an add-on. It was a CD game. I mean, the CDI. And there could have been interesting stuff done with it if they had just even asked Philips to make like a processor or something for the SD4. That could have been interesting. Maybe the graphics a little bit better. But they burned bridges. I don't consider the CDI. The main problem with the CDI is that its games can be found over consoles. However, it was released pretty early. So I don't know how much of the factor that was. Probably get into it later. Mad Dog, McCree, sorry, 1 and 2 were released for the CDI, Space Ace, and all the Don Bluth games. Board games, generic stuff you can pretty much find in every console. I mean, a lot of people give a lot of slack to the games, but the technology was there for them to be breakouts. They impressed at the time, and historically set off a big chain of events. We owe a lot to Philips CDI and Nintendo, even though they fucked up everything for the evolution of video games. With the CDI, we got pretty much the whole 5th generation. Philips helped develop the CDI format. They made CD technology. Sony basically stole their Sega CD's ideas. Well, I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't have no proof of it, but I'm pretty sure they had a whole bunch of stuff they learned from that. And just did it better. I don't know. Is it stealing if you do it better? I don't know. Very interesting historically. The first and only and really poor time when a Nintendo game is licensed to an outside console. And it's interesting now, in 2017, 19 years later, think about it, after Fire Emblem and Mario, Super Mario Run ended up on the iPhone. Nintendo learned the lesson there. CDI pretty much led to the... It didn't really. Nintendo ended up with the Nintendo Captain N, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which I'll get into, Everything that went wrong with Super Mario Bros. Movie was their fault. They wanted it to be dark. They wanted it to be light. They wanted it. They put a whole bunch of instructions to the directors, and then they ruined everything. The CDI PlayStation Aftermath was a disaster, as I mentioned before. The CDI games were poor, although not historically relevant, because that nobody owned a CDI and nobody knew what happened with the CDI at the moment. It was noteworthy. Not noteworthy. But it does show the change in balance of power. Sega negotiated with PlayStation. I'm guessing TurboGrafx probably did too. I'm not sure though, don't quote me on it. But anyway, there was talk about combining forces. Nintendo could have owned the fourth generation as well by teaming up with PlayStation, and Final Fantasy VII could have been on Nintendo PlayStation. I mean, there's other stuff that Super Bunny Hop mentioned, like about how the Nintendo PlayStation just wasn't that powerful at the time. But I don't know. No one really got into the story of why was the Nintendo PlayStation so much different than the PlayStation that we got to know. Space and no space. This is a big shift in power. Philips had good technology with the games. They failed as a video game console company. But it's an admirable loss. I don't know if it was art. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it was business. And bad business. It wasn't noteworthy. I admired Philips as like a Walt Disney or something. How they were able to craft the CGI format, and create a console for that. If they had just added more time and added more budget to the games, maybe the Philips CGI would have been a success. They had good formulas. I don't know if there's a remake at the time that was at the same scale as the Philips CDI licensed Nintendo games. Not to mention that Philips actually got a license for a Nintendo game prior to the iPhone. Probably the first time ever since they left the Atari 7200 market or whatever. They were making their own version of that console. People were impressed by the games originally. I don't know what the history was behind the Philips CDI not selling well. Obviously, there was not a lot of advertising, as I didn't hear about it until like 10 years after the console, or 5 years after the console went down, 10 years after the console got released. If they had made good ports, which are basically what these games are, of Legend of Zelda 1, NES, Link to the Past, Zelda 2, we could have said that Philips had a noteworthy moment in the 4th generation and 5th generation. And I would say they probably did. Even if you don't like their games, even if you didn't like, if you think there's absolutely no redeeming value of the games they made, or no historical significance, you can admit that Philips had an impact on the video game industry with their partnership with Nintendo, the knowledge they shared with Sony. Nintendo also made big mistakes, as I mentioned before. Square left them. They had a team of Rare. Pretty much lost all the third-party support by the time the N64 came out. They decided to go with cartable CDs, which is an interesting strategy. And you can't say it was the worst strategy ever, but they did lose third-party support. Everybody wanted to go to the CD format for the PlayStation. And heck, in Japan with the Sega Saturn. Nintendo ended up in second place, but they could have been first place. And PlayStation, CDI, and Philips are a really big part of that. I don't know what I can say about history, more than that I've said so many times, but an exciting time, you know. They were like sort of a up-and-coming video game division, like an indie company coming out now. Not so much now, but like 5 years ago when Steam was going big, and Amazon made their own video game company. Or I mean, right now I guess it would be like VR, like Philips VR versus Sony VR versus Nintendo VR versus PlayStation VR. Who's the best VR company? Maybe we'll explore that in 5 to 10 years. And see who makes the Sonic, the Sonic, Zelda CDI crossover, which everyone hated. It wasn't done by Sega or Nintendo. That's a good note to end on. Hope you guys enjoyed.